Alright. Excuse me. So, basically every other video on this channel that I've uploaded, I've done so spontaneously. And today is no different. I'm going to be riffing on whatever comes to my mind, and with the hopes that it will be something that is good and educational and interesting to somebody else. So, without further ado, I present to you my thoughts. I guess I just feel like talking about sort of where I've been recently, what I've been doing and thinking about and studying. I recently got this book in the mail, which is called Gödel, Escher, Bach, and it's written by this dude called Douglas Hoffstadter, who I don't think is a clinical mathematician. He definitely is very interested in math and systems and kind of being able to understand systems and system thinking, being able to think within systems. And that has sort of rubbed off on me a little bit for a lot of reasons. I'm first and foremost, I guess, a musician. So I'm going to school for music, and I have been studying sort of the way to codify music, I guess, or at least that's what feels like to be a main interest of mine. And so I've been learning how to sort of code and how to look at music as one of these systems, which it is. I mean, fundamentally, music is mathematical in that way, because math is a very intensely codified system, and music is a system. It's not quite so particular in the way that we've been doing it. It was very much that for a long time. Music was a science, and throughout the years and years and years and like thousands of years, for thousands of years, music was sort of just this kind of ritualistic thing that would occur, and it was I'm talking like back in the days of like tribalism and everything. Music was just a way to sort of express your god or your tribe, and to sort of bring people together through rhythm and dancing and movement and synchronization, in a way to sort of synchronize our minds and our bodies, and really just become one sort of living, breathing, moving entity. And that I believe is sort of what was the beginning of music. And then we started to look at it, and it all started when, in like the early times, with chant and with basically with the church, and not necessarily the Catholic Church, although that was, well, no, actually I think necessarily the Catholic Church. But in any case, people were singing chorales, and people were singing, not chorales, but sorry, getting technical here. They weren't chorales, but they were singing in choirs, in chorus, notes, and most of the time these were improvised on some sort of loose format, and it was meant as a spiritual devotion sort of thing. And over time, people saw this and they wanted to get more particular about it. So they, kept most of the improvisation, but they wanted to say, like, you should hit around this note and then slide up to this note and then, like, slide down to this note and stay there for a certain amount of time, and, maybe use this kind of note instead of that kind of note. And so that is what gives you early forms of music notation, which I can kind of just sketch out here. If there's any musicologists watching, I'm sorry. But this is sort of the general idea. You would just get like something like this, and it would be on a staff, and there would be like some more kind of like stuff telling you what to do exactly, but the idea is you're here singing a note, and then you slide up to this note, and then you hold this note, and then you slide down to this note. They didn't always have the lines drawn between them, but simplicity in explaining. So I did that. And so that's sort of what started to turn it into this codified system, whereas before it was just sort of free expression within a system, but the system was sort of subconscious. And so this is what began to codify it, and that is the creation of what it means to write down music, because before music was not written down. And now it is. So within that, you start to get into people thinking about this and what this kind of is, and so you get the birth of these things called the modes, which was before scales. So we still didn't have the major scale at this point in time, but you had modes, which it's really dependent on the intervals that you sing between certain notes. So you have a starting note that is we call it the fundamental. I don't remember what they called it, but it was like the home bass note. And then you have what we would call so, which is the fifth note in the scale, which if you're in C major, C is the home note, G is the fifth, which is the dominant, which is the note that you go to before you go back to the first note. So it's sort of like the signaling of, like, so, do. It's like very, that's just the arrival note, I guess. I don't really know how to explain it better than that. But so with modes, you start on the home note, and it's so hard to explain this without explaining it within our understanding of intervals, but I guess it's sort of neither here nor there. So we get the modes, and then that snowballs for a while. People start like exploring that idea and writing it down and creating music, and then you get the major scale and all these scales and all of these, like, so then you get the scales, and then you have this sort of system within the system to operate within. And so then from there, once you've got that, that's where we stopped sort of for a long time. That's where we stopped for a really long time. And now from that you get chord progressions. So instead of thinking about just singing from note to note, you're doing harmonies, and you're doing chords. So you go from a C major to a G major to a C major to an A minor to a G major to a C major, and that is a chord progression that musically makes a lot of sense. I don't know if my piano is hooked up. It is! Sweet. So, hold on. Right, okay, so C major. Hopefully you can hear that. So you get a C major, a G major, and a C major. You can hear how it's like home, tension, and then release. That is the chord progression, and this is specifically a cadence, which is sort of like punctuation. So if you're like, that's the end, right? And that's how we feel it. That's how it sounds, because that's for such a long time been the code. That's what you do to get that sort of feeling out of it, right? So at this point, we're past chords to be well, we're kind of past chords, but so if we did what I was saying was the one, which is okay. So basically, okay. So Roman numerals within music is sort of just describing what chord you're at. So if I say 1, the 1 chord is the home note, the home chord. So in C major, the home chord, the 1 is C major. And then the 5, which is the 5th note within the scale of C major, the 5 is the dominant, I forget what I called it, but it's the it's the before you get home and then you get home. So the 1 5 1 is a progression and a cadence. The 5 going down to the 1 is the cadence. That's a cadential motion. So with that logic, if you go 1 5 1 and then from 1 to 6 to 1, you go the 6 is the 6th note, which is A. So it goes, well, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But if you start at C, C being 1, you go C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, F is 4, G is 5, and A is 6. So it sounds like this. 1, 6, 5, 1. And it doesn't sound that great because you don't have voice leading, which basically is just a way to make the notes all sound much better than just like chunky chords moving up and down the scale. But so that kept us busy for a really long time. You know, we use Roman numerals so that no matter what scale you're playing in, you can always call the home note 1. So instead of having to say C sharp or D flat or whatever, the same thing, but you can just call it 1, right? So if I'm in C major is 1. If I'm playing in G flat major, then G flat is still 1 if you're in the key of G flat major. So we explored that whole system within music, and you get so much variety and so much beautiful music out of all of these chord progressions and all of these different ways of playing sort of the same 12, actually the same 11 notes, because the 12th note is the octave, right? So you go from C up to C, C is the 12th note, and it's also the first note. So it's a looping system, and that is a big idea in this book about systems, and he calls them strange loops. Basically sort of saying that, like, music, when written in a certain way within a system, can loop in on itself without seeming like it's looping. Like you feel like you're constantly progressing and going forwards, and then you get back to where you started, right? So I forgive me, I can't. Maybe I can't play this, but if you progress through all 12 scales, all 11 scales, using fifths, then you feel like you're going through all these keys, and you feel like you're going somewhere, and you're constantly progressing to something else, and then you get back to C. You know, if you start at C, you can progress through all of them and get back to C. So I can kind of tell you what that sounds like. So messed that one up. Hold on. Oh, hold on, sorry. Gonna try that again. But do you get the idea? I mean, can you hear how it sort of sounds like every single chord works together, even though none of them are in the same scale, in a way? So let me try that again. C, G, D, which is the fifth of G, right? So now, so the first two chords technically were in the same scale, right? So you have C major going to G major, still in the same scale, and then all of a sudden you get this D major chord, which D major doesn't exist in C major, the scale. What exists is the 2 chord, which is a D minor, just based on the scales, and I could get into that, but it's a lot of talking, and this video is already 16 minutes. So, so C, G, E major, A major, E major, E major, B flat major, C sharp major, G sharp major, D sharp major, B flat major, F major, and we're back to C. How the fuck did we get there? We just modulated through all of the keys, and at no point did it seem like it didn't make some sort of sense. Like provable sense, right? So like if we take the 1 to the 5 to the 1 as like a proof, like that is a proved theorem within the system of music. We know that going from the 1 to the 5 and then back to the 1 gives you basically the entire fundamental idea of what it is to progress through chords. And because all chords, all scales sort of share all chords in a way, especially with fifths. So you go from C to G, and now, since we're at G, if we're in C, which we were, if we were at C, this is the 5, but it could also be the 1 of G, right? So we're in C, still in C, but also in G. And now we go to D, and we're definitely in G now because we've gone to the 5. But if we go to the A, then we're definitely in D because we just went to the 5 from the 1, which was A, which was D, which was the 5 of G, which was the 5 of C. So it's like this strange fucking looping thing, man. It's like, it's insane. And you can do that through all of them because, you know, C to G, D to A to E to B, they're all 5-1, 5-1, 5-1, 5-1, 5-1 through all of it, and you're constantly progressing, and then you loop back because you do, because music is a system, a closed system with certain principles and certain ideas. So, all that being said, we thoroughly explored, you know, the collective we, thoroughly explored what it means to progress and what it means to do chord progressions and cadences. Like, we went through all of that. There's actually, I don't know what it is, I gotta look it up, but there's this chart that, I gotta give you the name of it because it's just wild. It's a chart of all possible chords up to 9 voices, and what that means is basically, what a voice is a single note. So that is just a C. So it's a 1 voice chord, kind of. This is, which we just call a unison. So if you have, you know, like 300 people singing the same C, it's a unison. They're all singing in unison, right? So that's why we call it that. If you have two, it's called a it's called a dyad, I guess. What is it? I don't know. I guess it's just an interval. I don't actually know the technical term for it, but you know, technical terms. But so if this is a C and that's an E, so C, E, you play them together, you get the major third. So two voices, C, E, and G, triad, three voices, four, etc. Up to nine. Nine voice chords. We charted them all out. There's a whole list. I can't find it. Chart of all possible chord shapes list. Let's see. No, I'm just getting like 46 chord shapes that you must know in order to be a good musician, you fuck. No, you don't. You don't need to know 46 chords. You can, it's nice, it's cool, it sounds good. Don't need to know them all. I don't know, I'm gonna spend this fucking video Googling. Well, in any case, maybe you just have to take my word for it. I really wish I could find the name of that, but in any case, we did it back in the 1920s. So that's when composers started to not really use specific chord progressions, but they started to just sort of use like sonic qualities of music, and it was sort of like what these composers were doing was more so using notes and harmonies and chords as paint on a canvas. You know, if you just sort of took a bunch of colors and just sort of like threw them at the canvas, that's kind of what they were doing with their music. You can look up like Arnold Schoenberg was a really good sort of example. He did a lot of atonal music, which is stuff like, you know, like that, but with way more thought put into it. It's really good stuff. It's mint. You also got Charles Wuorinen, which is Wuorinen. He's really good. He's excellent. Who else? I can't particularly think, but there's a whole lot. If you're interested, just look up atonal music. You'll find a lot of really ish stuff, but you'll find a lot of really great stuff too, and it's kind of hard to tell the difference, especially if you're not like super exposed to this kind of stuff, which thankfully I am, because I'm getting a degree in music, so you can take my credentials as truth. Everybody, listen up. I have a piece of paper. Well, I have a theoretical piece of paper. I haven't graduated yet. But I you know, been experienced to this. All sarcasm aside, I have experience with this shit, and so I can suss out what I enjoy about it, instead of it just being this sort of weird mess of stuff. So anyways, we did all that. We did all that stuff with music and chords and progressions, and then we got out of the system by going into the fuzzy gray area of the system. You know, instead of nailing ourselves down to working with chord progressions and specific movements, and the voice leading has to be proper, and this how you can't go to that chord from that chord, you fool. You skip all that and just start making cool sounding stuff. But that is the moment that you step out of this system and you begin to see the system from a vantage point that's higher than from working within it. So the whole time we were working within the system of chord progressions, and you have to go from here to there, and etc., we now start going into the fuzzy areas. We start going into the questioning of it all, and the why do we have to do this, and why can't we do that? And that is what creates a distance between you and this this system that you have to work within. And so now there's all this other great stuff that hasn't been really touched yet, and it's kind of tricky to explain quickly, but basically this whole system that we've been working with since a long time ago, basically since the invention of like tuned instruments in the orchestra, we have been tuning our pianos and instruments to the same 12 notes, to the same scales, to the same frequencies, and for the longest time, the tuning note is A equals 440 hertz. And so what hertz and what the frequency means is that within a certain amount of time, within 1 second, the sound wave oscillates, which means it goes up and down and back to where it started. It's a sine wave, looks like that, but on a graph. You've probably seen this in calculus, and it sucked. That's a sine wave, and so the pressure wave of the sound does that, oscillates, does that 440 times in 1 second. So that's what that means. And so when we say that A equals 440, that's what we mean is that we tune our entire system of music based off of this specific frequency. And that's all fine. That's cool. There's a lot of people out there that say A should equal 432 hertz, mostly just for new age bullshit reasons. Makes me feel better, bro. The vibes are way better if you listen to music tuned 8 hertz down. It's like, so great. Maybe, I don't know. I don't want to be an asshole and like say that this does not matter, because like it's all in your head. If you believe that really makes a difference, and you feel better because of it, and you act differently, and it like the vibes really do level out, then hell yeah, dude, do that, do it. But the meaning's only there if you want it to be, I guess. So, tangents aside, we've been tuning all of our stuff to this thing called 12-tone equal temperament. So that's a big word, but it doesn't have to be scary. Basically, what it means is, like how I said earlier, there's 12 notes between the octave, right? So you have C, and then you go up 12 notes from C to C. So C, next octave up, C. If you aren't pitch deaf, then you can hear that C is higher. Or sorry, not pitch, tone deaf. If you're not tone deaf, which is an actual thing that people experience, is tone deafness. And luckily I'm not tone deaf. And there's tons of musicians who are tone deaf. But anyways, that C is an octave higher. And what 12-tone equal temperament means is that there's 12 notes between the two C's. And there's nothing stopping us from going outside of 12. So we can do 23-tone equal temperament, which means there's 23 tones between the two C's. Or like 5, you could do 5-tone equal temperament, which means there's 5 tones between the two C's. And what makes it equal You know, that's so 12 tone. You know what 12 tones are. Equal. 12 tones equal. What makes it equal? What makes it equal is that every single note is the exact amount. Is the exact same amount of frequency apart. So I don't know the exact decimal points or any of that bullshit, but basically if you start at 440 hertz and then let's say that we want our equal tone temperament to be 20 hertz, your first note is going to be 440 hertz because that's what we decided, and then your next note up is going to be 460, and then your next note up is going to be 480, and then your next note up is going to be 500, etc. Now, because I chose 20 as an arbitrary number that isn't correct in the mathematical sense, this scale, well, no, actually it would repeat because you're just adding by 20, so eventually you would add enough 20s to get up to 880 hertz, which is the next octave up, because when you're dealing with octaves, it's a double of the first note. So if our first note is 440 hertz, then the octave up from 440 hertz is 880 hertz. And then the next octave up from that is 1720 hertz, whatever 880 times 2 is. And that is what an octave is. Like mathematically, that's what an octave is. Yeah, so 12 tones equally spaced apart to repeat at the octave. That's like the whole goal of an equal tempered system. And tempered, I think, just kind of means like it's modified in some small way in order to actually make it repeat. But that's not important. All you gotta know is that the tones are equally spaced apart as you go up the scale. So 5-tone equal temperament means that there's, 5 tones before you get to C. Again, from C. C, 5 tones, C. And every single one of those is spaced the same amount of space apart. And you can have an infinite number of equal tempered scales. The only thing is that those distances get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller the more notes you add. So if we do by 1, if you go 440 and then 441 and then 442 and then 443 and then 444, etc., up to 880, we would get there, but we would have 439 notes in one octave, which is fundamentally useless and probably fairly imperceptible. It would basically just sound like it would be like a slide up. It wouldn't sound like individual notes anymore, right? So there's a certain area within which we can operate in order for it to be called a note. Maybe that's another gray area that we got to explore at some point, but we haven't explored this gray area yet, which is getting out of 12-tone equal temperament, which is the tuning that we use. So that's something I've been thinking a lot about. Can you tell? I talked about it for 34 minutes. And yeah, you use a lot of computers. You use a lot of computers for this kind of stuff. A lot of math calculations. But I've just been thinking a whole lot about how music is basically math. I mean, you can turn all of music into numbers. You can represent notes and scales of any type using numbers. And then you can sequence those numbers using computers to play music and using formulas for the way that you sequence those numbers. And you can do so much cool shit with it, man. I'm fucking amped about it, but Yeah. Well, um, I hope that some of you find this video interesting, and that's something I've been thinking a lot about. Yeah, more to come, hopefully. This one wasn't spiritual. Well, no, it was spiritual in a different way. It wasn't very spiritual as far as like the last videos that I've uploaded, but this is a spirituality, I think. You know, it's yoga. The Bhagavad Gita has this really beautiful way of explaining the different forms of spiritual existence. There's multiple different forms of it, and one of them is yoga that you practice in your work, and you can reach the same sort of mindfulness and awareness and consciousness through what you do, through what you physically do and mentally do. But it's, you know, physical, mental is like the same thing. Maybe that's another video. But yeah, this was hopefully intelligible and understandable. I hope you enjoyed.